everybody. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And you are very welcome to our continuing coverage of Hulu's limited series, The Dropout, about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. We are talking about episode 3 today, which is entitled Green Juice.
Oh.
There are so many things to say about this episode, but I want to just give you a tour de force of my notes really quickly, because I didn't take detailed ones this time.
Okay.
Everything was fine until it's Novartis. Now you're not fighting for your business, you're committing fraud. Their relationship is so fucked up.
Uh-huh.
Her board is all white dads from suburbia who are taking time off from their golf game to deal with their utterly controllable daughter. Seriously, what is their relationship? Isn't there a lot more things that have to happen before you introduce humans to this mess?
Good question.
The fucking voice. Oh, you can't break up with her. She just made you COO and spent $20 million of your money. Those are my notes for the episode.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I have similar notes, but also much more.
Like details. Yeah. So, essentially what happens in this episode is the transition from Elizabeth running this thing to it becoming what eventually became. I mean, like, for me, this is the transition episode.
Sure, yeah.
She pushes out...
Episode. Yeah.
Yeah, she pushes out all the people she trusted in the beginning, pretty much. In terms of, like, staff. It becomes a nanny state. There is so much security that, like, I would have quit just out of, like, anxiety for having to swipe my swipe card that many times.
Yeah.
We have got a board member who is finally... There is only one board member who is not hoodwinked by her charms, and that board member is eventually asked to leave the board. There's a lot of kind of consternation around, do we trust Elizabeth? And ultimately, the answer is no. But then Elizabeth pulls weaponized white woman tears out of her back performance pocket and convinces them to let her stay on. So that's the overall summary. I mean, plot-wise, the other thing, too, is that Edmund and Elizabeth go to Nashville to an oncology clinic and actually test this stuff on a live human person. Edmund, not excited about that. Elizabeth thinks he's being, I think, a child.
Yeah.
And, like, throwing a temper tantrum.
Yeah.
Elizabeth continues to demonstrate to us that she does not understand science or clinical trials or humans. And we also see at the end of this episode is where she finally decides to do the deep voice we all know now as the Elizabeth Holmes voice, which is a performance. We see also her final uniform that we will come to know her as. The persona of Elizabeth Holmes is solidified in the last couple seconds of this episode, where she drinks only green juice and she wears black turtlenecks and black power suits and always has her hair back in this one messy kind of half ponytail bun thing because brushes are evidently beneath our girl, and has this wide-eyed look all the time and this really deep voice
And the red and the red lip and the power lip.
and the red power lip against her very, very pale alabaster skin. So that's kind of, in terms of the plot development for moving forward for Theranos, I think that's like the important stuff. Did I miss anything thematically? I know I missed events, but like thematically.
You didn't, no, thematically. No, I think breaking it into themes, you hit all the high points. I want to start with a little bit what I talked about in the last episode, which is that context is key, as we often say. So the context of when she is attempting to be this billionaire, inventor, magician, is really, really key. And so I love a show that understands context and sets that up for us. At the opening scene is Elizabeth waiting outside the Apple store in Palo Alto or wherever nearby to get the iPhones. so like iPhone is launching. It's June 2007. I totally forgot that 1234 by Feist was the iPhone song. We all know at least like the opening line of that song.
1, 2, 3, 4. Da, 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 da. I don't even know the words. Oh, sweet angel. That's all I know. Yeah.
Reminds me again, I need to go back and find my Feist. I think it's somewhere in my
I
iTunes.
definitely bought that album to try to be cool and then never listened to it.
I bought that album to try to be cool and really liked Feist and kept listening to it. Yeah, so I think that's like, again, setting us up for understanding her, and also this, like, psychologically she has this need to do things in a hurry. And I think some of it is context driven. I think most of it is psychologically driven. But some of it is context driven in that this is a crazy time in all of our lives where new technologies just like the smartphone changed everything.
And there's a serious fetishization of Apple.
Yeah.
Which, like, the other opening scene is her poaching Apple's design lead.
Yes. Yeah, a woman named Ava, who she, like, sells? I don't know how she sells her, but she sells her on coming over from Apple. She also gets, like, she's starting to get people on the board that have big names. So the board member who calls her on her BS came from Apple as well, Avi Tavanian. And he's the one that kind of brought Anna, the design head, over as well. So she's getting a lot of buzz. This was never her problem. Buzz was never her problem. But we're getting, you're right, the fetishization of Apple specifically, and also this like ramped up introduction of all these new flashy, pretty devices. And she's like, oh, I need to make a new flashy, pretty device. But the science. But the science. Yeah. So I feel like this is the episode where I was a lot more comfortable with the story, just because of, like, the inventor doesn't do a lot with her early years. It's more about this part.
Yeah.
And, you know, the nanny state that she starts, the spyware, the, like, stalking her employees, like, all of this was the stuff I was like, oh yeah, I forgot she did that. She was a little bit crazy. We're also coming up to the recession, which I think is really important. It's like getting hinted at in a news clip in the background.
Good old Brian Williams on TV.
Good old Brian Williams on the nightly news, telling us about the impending housing bubble that's about to burst. And yeah, we start to see her real disconnection between selling something and making something that works. And the conversation that she has with Avi is that, like, he goes to her as they're, like, looking at the shiny new offices and labs that they're building. And he says, like, we haven't seen any of the deals. Like, we haven't seen any of the Novartis deal, the Pfizer trial deal, like, all of this. You haven't shown us any of this. And he asked
Which,
her
like,
about...
his ask is not unrealistic. Like,
at all.
She's supposed to be reporting these things to the board.
That's what she's supposed to do. And
like, she's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and he asked her for validation, like data validation, that this works. And she said, well, that's just a formality. And he looks at her and goes, validating the machine works is a formality? And I was like... I mean,
that's it. It's so funny because...
Yeah.
I was thinking a lot about, like, one of the things that boards have to be is they are fiduciary agents of the company.
Yeah.
So all of these men who don't question her are perfectly comfortable throwing away money at a girl they barely know.
Yeah.
So, like, Avi is the only one who is being fiscally responsible that as presented to us in this show.
I wonder if it's because he's not a white dude. Like,
it's possible.
Some of it is like super white dude privilege energy coming from most of the board, and like only
like everybody was interrupting their back nine. Like, that's really what I felt like.
Yeah, and like only a man named Don Lucas who wears a cowboy hat in Palo Alto can like fund things by his gut. And that's what he said.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, but I trust my gut. I make decisions by my gut. And Avi's like, but we haven't seen the contracts, so I don't care about your gut.
Like, you may like her, and she might be, like, have promise.
She's lying.
That's great.
She's lying?
But she's lying.
And this is where we get the introduction of a phrase that I found exceptionally patronizing at the time, even though it was true. Where Avi tells Don Lucas that she needs adult supervision. And I was like, oh, the patriarchy. I love this, but also she does, because she's 23 and she doesn't know what she's doing.
And even worse, she's 23 and thinks she knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
And we get that in this date that she has with Sunny, where she says, I can't make a single mistake or they'll take my company from me.
Yeah.
So if I could step upon a soapbox briefly.
Please do. I push his soapbox towards you to stand on.
It's not your company anymore, sweetheart. Like, that's what happens when you get other people's money.
Yeah.
It's not your company anymore. Also, if this is entirely about you maintaining control of your company, explain to me how that is about disrupting an industry. If you are truly here to disrupt an industry and save people's lives, you'll do whatever it damn takes, including making sure you have a working prototype. So you can miss me with this, we're changing the world. You want your name on a building. Fine. Call a spade, child. You don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You don't know what you're doing, and it's not your company once you bring other people in. It's just not. You didn't put up any money. You didn't put up a single cent because you've never made any money in your life. You've never held a job for anybody else. You don't understand how the economy works. And all you have done is taken money that should have gone to teaching you how the world works and pour it into science that doesn't exist. Oh, you're doing my nut. Not your company anymore.
That was a beautiful soapbox. Very articulate. I mean, yeah, she doesn't, and this is the piece, the puzzle piece we keep trying to fit here, is that she doesn't understand humans. And she doesn't understand business. But she mimics it enough to get by. And so it's just this fundamental like, she just doesn't understand that when you bring board members in and they bring money, they have financial stake in your business. You are now responsible to those people. You are accountable to those people. That's what a board is. And like, we got this in this episode is when they go, is when, it's just double checking my notes, when they go to Nashville, and she keeps pushing back that she insists on doing the trial with Pfizer. So Pfizer has organized this trial at this oncology clinic in Nashville, and they can't get a prototype to work, and she's like, we're doing it anyway. Without a functioning prototype. Like, how can you? Edmund just looks at her and is like, we can't test this on people. Or Rakesh, one of them, says it. And is like, we can't test this on people. And she's like, no, I'm going to do whatever it takes because that's what Larry Ellison told me. I have to do everything that it takes. And she, like, the thing that amazed me so much in this episode was every time somebody was like, but you faked the trial, she was like, but that's what a trial is. And I'm like, no, a trial isn't to test out your machinery.
I mean, a trial for FDA approval involves humans.
Yeah.
A trial to get a pharma company to get a meeting could involve pig's blood, you weirdo. Like...
Yeah, and she was just like, well, that's what a trial is. I was like, a trial isn't... No, a medical trial is to see that if your product that you say works, not to test your product to see if it works.
And I think they never got FDA approval. I think they were never clarified as a medical device, and that's part of how we got their whole fall down.
Yeah.
Because I think now, like, there is no way that they could have filed an ANDA. There's just absolutely no way. They don't have any of the data. So I even want to know, like, how'd you hoodwink Pfizer into this?
How'd you get Pfizer to agree to a medical trial?
my guess is that she either flat out falsified or they didn't actually agree to what she did.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how she did it, but it made me feel real icky again. Like, real icky. And, you know, God love the cancer patient who she ended up speaking to, who honestly told her, like, oh, if I could have a device at home that would test my blood and I wouldn't have to come into the doctor and I wouldn't have to get stuck by a million needles, like, thank you so much. And to a person who, you know, we don't diagnose people on this show, but we could say possibly exhibiting sociopathic tendencies.
Certainly as portrayed in the show.
As portrayed in the show, yes.
I think they are trying to get us to believe that might be something that is a part of her life.
Yes. There is clearly a disconnect where she is not really capable of understanding humans or emotions for whatever reason. But you know, she just grasps onto that, like, validation. And, like, she wants to believe that she's doing good. She wants to believe that she's doing a good thing and a right thing. And all it took was that cancer patient to be like, okay, I can justify everything else now because this woman said I'm going to help her. And God bless that woman. But it really set Elizabeth down a spiral that, like, convinced her that she has to make this work.
Yeah.
And making it work wasn't making the tech work or the science work. It was, as you said, you know, previously, you know, Wizard of Ozing it. Like, tap dancing so that nobody notices, not, you know, putting on a show so that nobody looks behind the curtain. And behind the curtain is no tech and no science.
So Don Lewis finds his brains somewhere and calls for a vote of no confidence. But as we said, she deploys tears and weaponizes her, I believe, non-genuine emotion.
Yeah, and weaponizes her age and gender.
Weaponizes those things to essentially get them to... She becomes the puppet master and gets them to let her stay on as CEO because she's brought in Sonny's $20 million, which she does without telling him. And what is interesting in particular about that is that their relationship throughout this episode is demonstrated as one in which they are both trying to control the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And so Sonny gets really angry when she shows up to a meeting and, or she shows up to a date and is on the phone and leaves. And then he takes out his aggression on the waiter because he's a fully formed, really emotionally mature adult. And then at one point he's trying to get her to drink this green juice because I'm going to guess that she eats like Funyuns and isn't taking care of herself. And she says she won't drink it because it's gross. And they get in this whole kind of fight about it. And he doesn't hit her, but he corners her violently to the point where the green juice gets all over the white shirt that she is wearing. And then the closing scene, which is... We need to really quickly talk about the music director of this show, who deserves all of the accolades. So, to the soundtrack of Back in Black by Amy Winehouse, which was absolutely a massive hit this year and incredibly appropriate for the story, we see the full transformation into Elizabeth Holmes, as we mentioned earlier. And the last thing we see her do before it goes black is take a sip of that green juice.
Mm-hmm. With Sonny standing
with Sonny right in the
her.
background. Yeah.
Like,
they
right
are
over
now
her shoulder.
The brand package.
Yeah.
He has stuck his nose into, he meets Stephen Fry in this episode.
Yeah.
She freaks out that he was there. It's like a power play.
Yeah, he's like, she doesn't tell him anything, right? Like, they go to buy a car, and he wants her to buy a Lamborghini, and she wants to buy a Prius, because everyone's buying a Prius, and she gets a phone call from Larry Ellison, and she, like, kicks him out of the car. So
I want to say, I laughed really hard at it. He's like, why do you want a car that doesn't make noise? And I cannot tell you how many times my husband and I have had this conversation. He's like, why do you want a car that doesn't make noise? I was like, why do you want a car that does?
Why do you want a car that does make noise? He loves that his car makes noise, Lil.
Oh, guys, my husband's a total petrol head.
He is 100%. Yeah, I totally thought of John.
So that made me laugh. I
laughed so hard. I thought of John when he was like, why do you want a car that doesn't make noise? I was like, oh, bless. But he doesn't, like, he has decided now that he doesn't like being on the outs because he can't, like, he needs to be needed and he needs to be valued, or he needs to be important. Let's say it that way. He needs to be important.
He needs to be important. I don't know if value comes into it.
Yeah. He needs to be important, and I think he needs to be needed.
Yeah, for sure. I think he needs to be needed. And, I mean, they both have daddy issues, like, in flashing lights on a Broadway marquee.
Yeah.
Like, it is so clear that they both have different and complementing daddy issues, but they both have them.
Yeah.
And, I mean, a lot of his is that he's still trying to prove himself to his dead father.
Yeah, and, like, his mother still lives in India, and, like, I don't think he has a great relationship with her, and, like, they, like, parent issues. I think they both have parent issues.
Parent issues, entirely true. Yeah, they have parent issues. And, like, we should say, he hints a little bit at, like, they were part of a migration situation when Pakistan was formed. It sounds like life was not great for the Balwanis.
Right. They were Hindus living in what became Pakistan, and if you have no idea what we're talking about, you should jump over to our Colonizers World Tour coverage, where we talk about the partition of the Indian subcontinent into India and Pakistan in our India 101 video. Cross promotion there. But yeah, and they forced migration as Hindus living in that part of the subcontinent into what became India. And, like, it doesn't sound great.
No, it doesn't sound great.
But like we said, he comes by it honestly, but it doesn't mean it's not icky. And, you know, he worms his way in by, when she's in Nashville, he goes to the lab and, like, says that he's a consultant and asks all these questions, and poor lovely Stephen Fry just tells him, like, all the beans.
I mean, I would have too, to be completely honest, because if, like, he shows up, if he has access in a place that is that locked down, he's supposed to be there.
He's supposed to be there. I wouldn't question it. Yeah. And yeah, it's painful. And then they get the missed date. She, like, promises to go on a date with him to make him feel better about the phone call situation, car thing. And then she shows up to the date and she leaves because she can't leave work. So that's
and he ordered for her, which, like,
oh yeah. And she was like, I don't want this. And he was like, leave it. I was like, oh, you've got control issues. Yeah.
I mean, I order for Aaron and Aaron orders for me, but, like, that's different than ordering for somebody who it's not their favorite food.
Yeah, no, like, I don't do it to control you.
No, I do it to save time if you're in the bathroom.
I don't do it as a power play.
No, no.
So I think the sunny of it all we've covered. He clearly at the end of the episode, like, he's like, I think we need to break up, and she was like, no, you're COO. I just made you COO.
I laughed hysterically when he said that. I was like, oh, she just spent $20 million of your money.
Yeah.
Saws.
Yeah.
And then it closes with the video of the deposition, which was so telling. And she says, I had the controlling share.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she didn't. Sunny did.
Yeah.
It's not her money.
It's not her money. And, like, you know, I meant to mention this earlier, but in the last episode, we get a moment where Stephen Fry and Edmund are talking about her, I think, while she's in Switzerland. And he says, you know, did you know she put her name down as on the patent as one of the inventors?
I forgot about that.
But
they make a big deal about that in the book. Yeah, she didn't do a damn thing.
She didn't do a thing. She didn't invent anything. She had an idea, and she told people about it, and they invented something. So that, I wanted to bring that in because that really clues us into her, like, this has to be hers, and she will do whatever it takes to make it hers.
100%.
Doesn't understand that. The other thing I wanted to talk about as I was rolling through my notes here is this idea, two things. I want to talk about bringing in the other engineer, this Brendan guy, because we didn't cover that.
True.
But she's starting to lose, people are starting to jump ship.
Yeah.
So that's another theme of this episode. We've got already Avi getting kicked off the board. He tells Anna, his friend from Apple, what happened, and she quits along with the entire design team and has like a whole row in the middle of the hallway with Elizabeth Holmes about it. We haven't even talked about the William H. Macy of it all, which is her neighbor from Houston who has filed a competing patent because he's mad she didn't ask him about advice because he works in patenting medical devices. So she's supposed to talk to legal about it, and Anna comes to her and says, or Anna comes to her and is like,
Did you falsify?
Did you lie? Yeah, did you falsify the Novartis results? Are you lying in this Pfizer trial? And she was like, lying? So that happens. Edmund gets fired because she brings in this other guy, Brendan, as an engineer to come up with a different prototype, which he does, and it works in inverted commas. And so Edmund loses his job. And then by the end of the episode, Rakesh shows up to Edmund's house and is like, I quit too.
And a couple things real quick. It's not that he creates a prototype. It's that he miniaturizes the science that already exists.
Yes, that's a very important point. He doesn't create anything new. He just made a smaller version of a glue machine and added blood to it.
Pretty much. And so what Stephen Fry makes really clear is this is not what you brought us on to do.
And this is not what we have a patent for either.
It isn't what we have a patent for. It isn't your vision. He says that.
Yeah.
And that's another thing where I was like, okay, she doesn't actually care. Like,
right.
All of you think she does, which is beautiful. And if I was in front of her, maybe I would too, because she had convinced me. But like, because I think I'd be immune to Adam Newman's charms. I don't know if I would have been immune to Elizabeth Holmes's, because I probably would have done what Anna did, which is like, oh, a girl my age.
Yeah. Yeah. She tells her, she's like, I thought you were like me.
I thought you were like me. I see that. I've done that before where I thought a young woman was like me and I put too much stock in them. That has absolutely happened.
Yep.
I have a much more tuned radar for white dudes than I do for any other intersection.
Yeah.
So that's just to be completely frank. But what got me so much is that like poor Stephen Fry is like, I joined this for the mission.
Yeah.
And she's essentially like, fuck the mission. I need to be Steve Jobs.
Yeah. And again, like, we just keep saying it, but like, there's this disconnect. She wants to be Steve Jobs. She doesn't really understand how Steve Jobs got to be Steve Jobs. And she thinks, for lots of reasons, that she should get to skip all of the steps that Steve Jobs did. And I'm not saying he didn't benefit from some white man privilege. You know, I'm sure he did. And
I'm sure he skipped some steps, but
I'm sure he did. Like, I don't know his whole story, so I can't speak authoritatively on it. But I do know that Steve Jobs invented something that worked.
I am confident in saying that he invented many things that worked, actually.
Yeah.
And my understanding of some of the steps he skipped include, like, labor and paying people an appropriate wage, not inadvertently, not outright defrauding shareholders and putting customers' lives in danger. He definitely puts his employees' lives in danger in terms of the mining in China, but not customers or cancer patients.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the fact that we eventually get to the stage where she is actually endangering people, because, you know, like you said, like Oracle, Apple, like it's tech. It's an MP3 player. Like you couldn't harm people with it, but like not directly. Whereas testing people's blood for diseases, you can harm people. And in this episode, we get a glimpse of one of the biggest problems that Theranos always had was the contamination of the blood samples. Because as we talked about last episode, you can't you can't shrink, like, Brendan was able to shrink down something that already worked into a smaller thing, a model, but you can't really do that with the mechanisms that you need to test blood appropriately. And so that was another, like, adept piece of foreshadowing where Rakesh and Edmund were still working on the prototype, and he's like, we just keep, like, we can't get around this blood contamination issue. But, like, it's you really harm people if you give them the wrong test results, which is what they ended up doing.
Yep.
Was, like, falsifying test results and, like, giving people the wrong test results.
And, like, not that what actually happened is the machines malfunctioned.
Yeah.
And so there were machines in Walgreens in Arizona that gave people the wrong, like Theranos didn't go in and change the stuff.
Right.
The machine gave them the wrong diagnosis.
Right.
There was stuff around diabetes and cancer and I think a thyroid disorder, where they just, the machine malfunctioned and flat out gave people the wrong diagnosis.
Yeah, which is what Phyllis Gardner said could happen from the beginning.
Correct. I would
Neil-
love an interview with Phyllis Gardner and know, like, the triumph she must feel
Certainly
at
validated.
watching Elizabeth go to jail.
So I would imagine she feels validated. Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to talk about was kind of the gender of this whole thing, and especially how her board treats her.
Okay.
And how she manipulates how her board treats her. Because that, to me, was one of the most fascinating things of this episode, was how she amassed all of these, and we've talked about this in a lot of different ways on this channel, the way that men respond to young, pretty, white, blonde women, like culturally trained to. In a lot
There was
of
a couple
ways.
times she did things and I was like, oh, if I tried to pull that, I would have never gotten away with it.
Showed up to, like, the work site with
In a spaghetti strap tank top with my bra showing.
With my bra showing. Yeah, and, like, yeah, there's only so many things that, like, a young, pretty white girl can get away with. And she gets away with just about all of them.
All of them.
Especially blonde, too. We should say, like, there's a bias against blonde women, that they are, like, less intelligent and need protection. And this all fits into, like, societal and cultural tropes as well. But it's so clear in this episode that her board is all a bunch of you want to talk about daddy issues? Again, this whole show, we should just call it, like, daddy issues. A story. Obviously, it's not as interesting as The Dropout, but, like, that's the subtext of all of this. All these men clearly think
Everyone needs therapy, a mini-series.
A mini-series about daddy issues. Like, all of these men clearly feel very, like fatherly towards her, to the point, and, you know, very few things make emotionally repressed white men uncomfortable more than, like, tears. And you can see their face. And, like, I think she knows this. I just made this connection because the girl at the Genius Bar who cried, tears made her uncomfortable.
Yep.
And she was like, oh. And tears make people uncomfortable. Like, she's just this alien being learning emotions. So she's
fascinating.
Like, I'm going to cry in front of these men because it will make them uncomfortable and I might get what I want. And boy, did it work.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that's why her story is so interesting, for a lot of why there's a book and a miniseries. And this show is based off a podcast because we've not quite seen someone like this before.
No, it's true. We have not. And New is fascinating. And she is a fresh take on a lot of tropes.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting. That's all I have for this one, though. What about you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm
Okay.
good.
Well, pals, if you enjoyed our conversation, please do the YouTubey things. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe, comment below. We'd love to know your thoughts. And we'd love to enter into conversation with you. Our YouTube community is one of our favorite things about our lives. And so we really hope that those of you, especially who are here for our Handmaid's Tale conversations, maybe join us here, because there's a lot of the same themes, and we'd love to we'd love to join with you in that. If you want to stay in touch with us, not on the YouTubes, we do a lot of other things, believe it or not. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter, because then you're going to get really good advanced knowledge of things like some webinars we're teaching and a masterclass we're running and a whole lot of other ways, maybe even a Patreon that we're plotting, and you don't want to miss it. So definitely make sure to hop onto our email newsletter. In the meantime, my hope for you is that if you drink green juice, it's of your own choice.
I think it's a sad but appropriate place to end, to say, like, I hope that you can have agency and consent over what you consume this week.
We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.